I want you to picture this. I'm standing in my own living room in my dress uniform, my toddler on my hip, and my husband's entire family is staring at me like I just robbed a bank. That's how my night started. Stay with me because it gets so much worse. And if you love a good justice story, hit subscribe now, because you do not want to miss where this goes. My name is Captain Elena Marsh, and that afternoon I just wrapped up a brutal training rotation at Fort Sill. I was exhausted in that bone-deep way only soldiers understand, but I was happy because I was finally going home to my daughter, Sophie, and my husband, Grant. Grant had texted me that morning. "Don't be late. Mom's got something special planned." I remember smiling at that message. Things between us had been distant for months. Clipped phone calls, one-word replies, conversations that felt more like status reports than a marriage. So I actually let myself hope his mother, Carol, had finally decided to warm up to me instead of treating my career like a personal insult. Carol had never hidden how she felt about my job. At our wedding, she told a table full of relatives that she never understood women who chose a uniform over a family. I'd let it go, the way I let a lot of things go, because Grant never once corrected her, and I told myself that silence wasn't the same as agreement. I picked up Sophie from daycare, and she reached for me with both arms, babbling my name the whole ride home. One small fist wrapped around the strap of her car seat like she was afraid I might disappear again. I remember glancing at her in the rearview mirror and thinking, maybe tonight really is the start of something better. Maybe Grant meant it this time. The house looked warm when I pulled into the driveway, porch light on, cars lined up along the curb. Grant's truck, his sister's SUV, his uncle's old sedan I hadn't seen in over a year. I actually laughed a little to myself, thinking Carol must have gone all out for whatever this surprise was. That hope lasted exactly as long as it took me to open the front door. The living room was packed. Grant's relatives lined the couch, the folding chairs, even the wall. Nobody stood, nobody smiled, nobody said a word. Grant stood by the coffee table with his mother beside him, arms crossed, like she was presiding over a trial. "What's going on?" I asked. Grant picked up a folder and dropped a sheet of paper on the table. "DNA results," he said flatly. "She's not mine." For a second the room just rang in my ears. Sophie grabbed my collar, confused by the silence. I looked at the paper, then at him. "What are you talking about?" Carol stepped forward, her voice sharp as glass. "We know exactly what you did. You humiliated this family." She pointed at the door. "Get out of my house." I hadn't said a single word in my own defense yet. I hadn't even had the chance. That's when the front door opened behind me and every single person in that room went completely silent. And if you want to know who just walked in, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. A voice behind me said, "Captain Marsh." Every head in that room turned at once. Standing in the doorway, in full dress uniform with the insignia of a one-star general on his shoulders, was Brigadier General Walter Kane. I hadn't seen him since the ceremony where he'd pinned a commendation on my chest 7 months earlier. I straightened instinctively, adjusting Sophie on my hip. "Good evening, sir," I said quietly. He gave a small nod, eyes moving slowly across the room. The silent relatives, Grant's pale face, Carol's finger still pointed at the door, and finally Sophie's wide, teary eyes. "I seem to have interrupted something," he said. Nobody answered right away. Grant finally spoke. "General, this is a family matter." "So I gathered." His voice never rose, but somehow the room got quieter anyway. He turned to me. "Captain Marsh, are you all right?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Sophie buried her face in my shoulder and started crying softly instead. General Kane stepped fully into the room. "I came here tonight to personally thank one of the finest soldiers in my command for her service record this year." His eyes shifted to Grant. "This isn't the reception I expected." Grant forced a smile. "Sir, there's just been a misunderstanding." Carol jumped in. "General, we're simply handling a private family issue." "A private family issue," General Kane repeated slowly, glancing once more at Sophie's tear-streaked face. "Conducted in front of what appears to be a dozen witnesses, ending with a mother and a 1-year-old being told to leave the house." He let that sit in the air for a moment. "I'm familiar with a great many definitions of private, ma'am. That isn't one of them." Carol's mouth opened, then closed again. He didn't respond to her. Instead, his gaze landed on the paper still sitting on the coffee table. "May I?" Grant hesitated, then handed it over. The general put on his reading glasses and studied it in silence for almost a full minute. Nobody moved. Even Sophie had gone quiet, as if she could feel the tension pressing down on the room. Finally, he lowered the page. "Who ordered this test?" "I did," Grant said. "Which lab?" Grant named a place I'd never heard of. "Was Captain Marsh present when the sample was collected?" "No." "Was there a court order authorizing it?" "No." "Was the chain of custody documented?" Grant's jaw tightened. I don't know." The general folded the paper calmly. "I've built a career on evidence, not assumptions." He looked around the room. "This isn't evidence, this is a piece of paper." Carol's arms stayed crossed. "It proves she cheated." "No, ma'am," he said evenly. "It proves someone printed a report." Grant's uncle cleared his throat and shifted in his folding chair. His sister exchanged a quick, nervous glance with her husband. For the first time since I'd walked through that door, I saw something other than certainty on a few of those faces. A flicker of doubt, small but real, spreading quietly around the room like a draft from an open window. The general set the paper back down on the coffee table, deliberately, like he was closing a case file rather than ending an argument. "I've sat on review boards for court-martial proceedings," he said. "I've seen forged documents before. They tend to have a particular kind of confidence to them, official-looking letterhead, official-sounding language, and absolutely nothing behind it when you ask the simplest questions." He looked at Grant. "You couldn't answer a single one." Grant's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. The silence that followed felt different this time, heavier, and for the first time uncertain, as if the ground everyone had been standing on all evening had just shifted a few inches to the left. General Kane turned to me one more time before we left. "Did you ever consent to a paternity test?" "No, sir." "Were you informed one had even been conducted?" "No, sir." He nodded once, like that confirmed something he already suspected. Then he looked squarely at Grant. "Accusing someone without verified proof doesn't protect a family. It destroys one." He paused. "Captain Marsh, I think you and your daughter should leave here tonight, and no one in this room should make another accusation until the truth is actually established." He walked us out to my car personally. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely buckle Sophie into her seat. When I finally looked up at him, the tears I'd been holding back all evening came loose. "I don't understand how they could do this," I whispered. He handed me a handkerchief from his jacket pocket. "I've served almost 30 years. I've watched good people get destroyed by rushed conclusions, and I've watched innocent people survive because they refused to stop looking for the truth." He met my eyes. "I believe you." Those two words did more for me than anything else that night. I stayed with my friend Priya, another sergeant I'd known since basic training. She didn't ask a single question, just hugged me and said the guest room was ready. The next morning, while Grant was supposedly at work, I went back to grab clothes and diapers for Sophie. The house was empty. Upstairs, Grant's laptop sat open on the desk, screen dark but unlocked. I wasn't trying to snoop, but a notification lit up the screen. "Kristen, everything went exactly like we planned. She'll never see this coming." My stomach dropped. With shaking hands, I opened the thread. "Kristen, did everyone believe the test?" "Grant, every single one of them." "Kristen, did your mom actually throw her out?" "Grant, exactly like we planned." This hadn't been some emotional outburst. It had been planned. I photographed page after page messages about humiliating me in front of the whole family, about making sure I left without asking questions. Then one line stopped me cold. "Kristen, once she's gone, selling the house will be so much easier." Selling the house? He'd never even mentioned it. Further down, "Grant, she'll probably just go back to the Army. She won't fight for it." 9 years of marriage, and he thought he had me completely figured out. Then I noticed a folder labeled taxes. Inside were bank statements. One transfer jumped out immediately. $16,000 moved from our joint savings account 3 weeks earlier. Then another. Then another. Nearly $38,000 had quietly vanished while I was overseas serving my country. I scrolled further back, my hands unsteady, and found a message from nearly a month earlier, long before I'd even landed back at Fort Sill. Kristen, are you sure she won't fight it in court? Grant, she's military. She won't want the drama on her record. She'll just leave. Reading it felt like watching someone describe a version of me who didn't actually exist, someone he'd built in his head to justify what he was about to do. I photographed that thread too, then checked the timestamps on the bank transfers again, cross-referencing them against my deployment schedule taped to the inside of the closet door. Every single transfer had happened while I was out of the country, unable to check the account, unable to ask a single question. I heard a car door slam outside. Carol was home early. I forwarded every photo to my personal email, closed the laptop exactly how I'd found it, grabbed Sophie's diaper bag, and hurried downstairs just as Carol walked in. Her face hardened instantly. I thought I told you to stay away. I'm only here for Sophie's things. You've already done enough damage. I looked at her, steady this time. I didn't damage this family. I expect the truth to speak for itself. I walked past her without waiting for a reply, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to defend myself to anyone. I drove straight to the office listed on the card General Kane had given me the night before. Attorney Angela Ford listened without interrupting as I laid out everything. The staged accusation, the fake test, the messages, the missing money. When I finished, I handed her my phone. She scrolled through the screenshots slowly, her eyebrows lifting more with each one. Finally, she looked up. Captain Marsh, I've represented military families for over 20 years. She tapped one of the messages. Your husband didn't just try to humiliate you. I think he planned to defraud you. The room went quiet. This wasn't just a marriage falling apart anymore. It was becoming something much bigger, and Grant had no idea his own messages were about to become the strongest evidence against him. Angela flipped to a blank page in her legal pad and started a timeline right in front of me. Dates of transfers next to dates of my deployment orders. Message timestamps lined up beside the night of the surprise. Watching her build it out like that, methodically, without a hint of the panic, I still felt every time I thought about that living room. Did more to steady me than anything else had since the front door opened that night. From this point forward, Angela said, setting down her pen, don't confront him, don't warn him, let him believe his plan worked. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every instinct told me to drive home and demand answers. Instead, I went back to Priya's, where Sophie was on the living room floor, stacking blocks, laughing like nothing in the world had changed. I picked her up and held her a little longer than usual. Priya took one look at my face. What did the lawyer say? I handed her the folder. She read through it in silence, and by the time she reached the line about selling the house, she just closed her eyes. I can't believe he actually wrote this. I can, I said, and I meant it. I'd been making excuses for Grant for years, every missed anniversary, every comment about my career getting in the way, every time Carol blamed me for choosing the Army over family. I'd told myself things would get better. They hadn't. I just hadn't wanted to see it. The next morning, Angela called. I've started tracing the transfers. And the money wasn't spent, she said. It was moved. Grant opened a separate account 7 months ago, one you never knew existed. Nearly $38,000 has quietly gone into it. I sat there in silence. That wasn't just savings. That was our daughter's future. There's something else, Angela added. The lab Grant used isn't accredited for legal paternity testing. I checked their license this morning. They're registered as a general wellness testing company, the kind that sells vitamin panels and allergy kits. They have no record of ever processing a paternity sample for anyone named Sophie, or for you. So the report was fake, I said slowly, like saying it out loud might make it more real. The report was fabricated, Angela corrected. There's a difference, and it matters legally. A false result from a real test is one thing. A document designed to look like a lab report, printed to deceive an entire family, is something else entirely, especially when it's tied to a financial motive. She paused. I want to request an independent, court-ordered test. Properly documented, both parties present, filed with the court directly. I want there to be no question left for anyone to argue about. I agreed immediately, not because I doubted the truth for a second, but because I understood, finally, What General Kane had told me in the driveway that first night. People who have already decided you're guilty don't change their minds because you argue louder. They change their minds when they're shown something undeniable. It was time to give them something undeniable. 2 weeks passed before Angela called and said one word. Ready. She'd built the case quietly and carefully. The fabricated DNA report with no verified chain of custody. The private messages between Grant and Kristen laying out the plan in their own words. And a paper trail showing nearly $38,000 moved into a hidden account over 7 months. On top of that, Angela had requested an independent, court-ordered paternity test through an accredited lab, with both Grant and me present, and the sample properly documented this time. He's not going to see this coming, Angela told me, and that's exactly the point. We scheduled the meeting for a Thursday morning at Angela's office. I asked Priya to watch Sophie. I hadn't told Grant anything except that we needed to talk about next steps, which was technically true. When Grant walked in, he looked confident, almost relaxed, like a man who assumed he'd already won. Carol came with him, sitting stiffly beside her son, arms crossed the way she always held them when she thought she was in control of a room. Angela didn't waste time on small talk. She slid a folder across the table. Before we begin, I want to introduce the results of an independent paternity test, conducted last week at an accredited facility, with both parties present and a documented chain of custody. Grant's smile faltered. That's not necessary. We already have results. You have a printout, Angela said calmly. This is a legal document. She opened the folder. Sophie is your biological daughter. There's no ambiguity here, 99.95% probability of paternity. The room went still. Carol's arms slowly uncrossed. That's impossible, Grant said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Angela didn't blink. It's not impossible. It's accurate. Unlike the report you presented 2 weeks ago, which, as it turns out, came from a facility that isn't accredited to perform legally admissible paternity testing, and which has no record of ever receiving a sample from your daughter at all. I watched the color drain from Grant's face. Angela continued. I also have copies of text messages between you and a woman named Kristen, dated 3 weeks prior to the night you presented that report to your family, discussing the plan in detail, including humiliating my client in front of your relatives, and I quote, making sure she left without asking questions. Carol turned to her son. Grant, what is she talking about? He didn't answer her. He was staring at the folder like it might change if he looked at it long enough. There's more, Angela said. Bank records show a series of transfers totaling nearly $38,000 out of a joint account, moved in small increments over 7 months into an account solely in your name. My client was deployed for a portion of that time and had no knowledge of these transfers. This is insane, Grant finally said. You're twisting this. Not twisting anything, Angela said. I'm reading it back to you. I hadn't planned to speak, but something in me finally settled enough to say it out loud. You didn't just accuse me in front of your entire family, Grant. You planned it. You wanted me humiliated, and gone so it would be easier to sell the house and keep the money before I even knew it was missing. Carol looked at her son for a long moment, then back at me. Is any of this true? Grant said nothing, which was its own answer. For the first time since that night in the living room, I saw something other than judgment in Carol's expression. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the beginning of one. Angela laid out what came next. Given the fraudulent report and the financial transfers, we were pursuing both a formal legal separation with full custody protections for Sophie and a separate civil claim to recover the missing funds. She'd also referred the falsified lab report to the state board that oversees testing facilities, since presenting fraudulent paternity results was not just a family matter. It had legal consequences of its own. Grant tried a few more times to argue his way out of it. Angela let him talk, then calmly returned to the documents, the dates, the numbers. Just like General Kane had told me that first night in the car, people who have already decided you're guilty don't change their minds because you argue louder. They change their minds when they're shown something undeniable. He'd been shown everything. There was nothing left to twist. At one point, Grant turned to his mother, almost pleading. Mom, say something. Carol sat very still for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice had none of the sharpness it carried the night she'd pointed me toward the door. I stood in my own living room and told an innocent woman to get out, she said quietly, because you handed me a piece of paper, and I believed it without asking a single question. She looked at me. I owe you an apology I don't know how to give properly. I didn't say it was fine, because it wasn't. But I nodded, because it was the first honest thing she'd said to me in 8 years. Angela moved the meeting toward logistics, timelines, filings, the independent lab's official report being entered into the court record the following week. Grant tried, one last time, to reframe the story. I was under a lot of pressure, he said. Kristen and it wasn't planned the way it looks. Angela simply slid one more printed page across the table, a message from 3 days before that night, time-stamped and dated. Grant, practicing what I'm going to say when she walks in. Mom's going to lose it. Perfect. He didn't have an answer for that one either. We walked out of that office a little after noon. I remember standing in the parking lot for a moment, just breathing, Sophie's car seat waiting for her in the back of my car, even though she wasn't with me. 9 years of marriage had ended in a folder of screenshots and bank statements, not because I fought loudly, but because I stayed quiet long enough to gather the truth. A few months later, the court finalized custody in my favor, with Grant receiving supervised visitation pending the outcome of the financial investigation. Angela recovered a significant portion of the missing funds, placed in a protected account for Sophie that neither Grant nor I could touch until she turned 18. The lab that issued the fraudulent report lost its operating license within the year, after the state board found it wasn't the first time they'd sold a fabricated document to a paying customer. Carol called me twice over the following months. The first time I let it go to voicemail. The second time I picked up, mostly for Sophie's sake. She was, after all, still her grandmother. Carol didn't ask for forgiveness. She just asked if she could see Sophie sometime, supervised, whenever I felt ready. I told her I'd think about it, and I meant it. Not every bridge needs to be burned all the way down. Some just need to be crossed more carefully the second time. I ran into General Kane once more, almost a year later, at a change of command ceremony on base. He didn't bring up that night directly. He just asked how Sophie was doing. And when I told him she'd started calling her stuffed rabbit General Bunny, because I told her a general once helped us, he laughed harder than I'd ever seen him laugh in uniform. I still think about that first night sometimes. The front door opening, the room going silent, the moment I thought my whole life had collapsed in front of people who were supposed to be my family. What I didn't understand yet was that it wasn't the end of anything. It was the moment the truth finally started catching up. These days, it's just me and Sophie, and every night when I tuck her in, she still reaches up and grabs my collar the same way she did in that car seat on the worst night of my life. Like she already knew, even then, exactly who was going to keep fighting for her. People ask me sometimes if I regret staying quiet that morning in the house, instead of confronting Grant, the second I saw that message light up his screen. I don't. It would have felt good for about 5 minutes, and then I'd have had nothing but my word against his, in a room full of people who had already decided which one of us to believe. Staying calm long enough to gather proof wasn't weakness. It was the only thing that actually worked. If this story kept you watching until the very end, that's exactly why I make these, so hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in Elena's position. See you in the next one.